Task D of the fundamentals of instruction is student evaluation, assessment, and testing. So, the dreaded tests and awful instructor critiques. Well, now you're doing that as an instructor, and this lesson is how to do that. So we'll go through how to appraise learner performance, the difference between assessment, critique, and give how to give an effective written exam. We've got a lot we're going to cover into this one. So assessment, critique, and assessment of piloting ability. All right, let's start off with assessment. So what is assessment? So the FAA's definition that they give is a process of gathering measurable information to meet evaluation needs. So how do we gather measurable information to meet evaluation needs? Well, we just give them a test, or we tell them do this maneuver or do this procedure, and then you assess how they do. So the purpose of assessment is to determine how your learner is progressing, determine their progress. Then you could give them feedback on where they're at, and then it gives me feedback as an instructor to know where more emphasis is needed. And so there are some characteristics of effective assessment. So this is our FAST COCO acronym. So the first F here for our FAST COCO acronym is flexible. So fit the tone, technique, and content to the occasion. So I'm not going to be extremely hard on a brand new student or be extremely easy and lax on a student in check ride prep. So I'm going to meet the technique and tone to the content of the specific occasion of that student. Next is acceptable. Learners should have confidence in their instructor and in their ability and knowledge in order for them to fully accept their assessment. If they don't, if they feel I'm coming each day with poorly planned, inaccurate lesson plans and that I don't have the knowledge or skills, then they're not going to accept my assessment. Then we have specific as another characteristic of effective assessment. Specific, students should have no doubt what they did good or wrong, what they did right or wrong, and knowing specifically how they can improve. So I'm not going to tell them, that landing was bad. That tells them nothing. So I can be more specific. I can tell them that they rounded out high. I can tell them that their airspeed was too low on short final. I can be specific about my assessment. Next is T for thoughtful. I want to be respectful towards students, so no need to degrade or ridicule or mock student performance. If I'm going to give someone an assessment, maybe do that in private in one of the back briefing rooms rather than in the front lobby with everyone else. Next, comprehensive. So I'm going to cover all strengths and all weaknesses that best suit the student's need to improve. I'm going to cover everything. Then I'm going to be objective. Assessments based on facts, not allowing for subjectivity. So no personal opinion. It should be subjective. Then constructive. Assessment is completely meaningless if it doesn't benefit the student. So I'm only going to give assessment if the student benefits from it. And organized. It should follow a logical pattern. So delivering the assessment in a logical way that makes sense to the learner. So maybe I'm simulating the oral for a check ride for a student, and I'm doing oral quizzing in a conversation rather than picking random topics for each question to simulate the real check ride and to make it a logical pattern. All right, there's different types of assessment. There's traditional assessment and authentic assessment. So let's start off with traditional assessment. It's a written test, like a true or false, multiple choice, fill in the blank, whatever. It's like that's what a traditional assessment is. So there's characteristics of a good written test. And this is our Dr. Kovu acronym. So D is discrimination. It should be discriminate. So this is the degree in which the test distinguishes the difference between learners. Next is reliable. the test results are consistent with repeated takes. Comprehensive, it's the degree to which the test measures the overall objectives. It should be objective, so there's no bias, no instructor subjectivity allowed to affect the score. It should be valid, so this is the extent to which the test measures what it's supposed to. And then usability, so the functionality of the test. Are the fonts and graphics readable, or does it hinder the student's ability to take the test? One thing that might seem confusing in this Dr. Kovu acronym is the difference between reliable and validity. So validity is basically the test measures what it's supposed to. So it's on the specific topic, and it covers this topic that it needs to, covers the objectives it needs to. And I want to compare comprehensiveness and validity. So again, validity is it covers the objective it needs to. Comprehensiveness is the degree in which the test measures that specific objective. So it needs to be both. It has to be on the right subject, it has to cover the right objective, that making it valid, and then it has to be comprehensive, so the degree that objective is being covered. All right, we talked about traditional assessment, then there's authentic assessment. So authentic assessment asks the student to perform real-world tasks to demonstrate their knowledge, so in a meaningful application of their skills. So an example would be like a check ride. So an example of authentic assessment is learner-centered assessment. So this is centered around the learner. The instructor leads the learner through a collaborative, like a collaborative assessment through these 4 open-ended questions. So this is our 4 R's: replay, reconstruct, reflect, redirect. So replay, you ask the student to replay what happened, and this will allow you to see the difference in perception of what your student perceived to happen and what you perceived to have happened. Then reconstruct, ask them to identify what they could have done differently. And then this is where they start to, that encourages those higher order thinking skills and self-assessment. Then we ask them a reflect question. So follow that up with a why. Insights come from putting meaning into perceptions. And another example could be asking, what was the most challenging thing that you learned? And then redirect. So relate the assessment to how it may help in the future. So an example would be like, how do we mitigate, this risk from the flight and for future flights? And they could say, well, I should, I'll use this as a reminder for me to use my checklist, or whatever solution they come up with. Really promoting that higher order thinking skills, those real world thinking skills. And progress is recorded on a rubric. So there's a rubric for maneuver grades and risk management skills. So we'll start with maneuver grades. So for the maneuver or procedure grades, they have to describe, explain, practice, and perform. So describe, at that stage, the learner can describe the elements of the maneuver. Explain, they can explain the maneuver's underlying principles and concepts. Practice, they can plan and execute the maneuver, but still need some coaching and assistance and will make some errors. And then perform. The student performs the maneuver to standards without instructor assistance. Then we have assessing risk management skills. So then they have to enter these 3 stages: the explain, practice, and manage, decide. So explain, they can verbally identify and understand risks, but needs prompted to identify risk and make decisions. So they need to, they can point out, okay, well, weather's not as good today, okay, and the winds are higher, and we don't have a lot of ceiling, and then you can pinpoint, oh, what else? You really have to assist them in identifying risks. Practice is they can, apply principles like single pilot resource management and be an active decision maker with instructor assistance. And the last is the manage and decide. So they can manage all aspects of risk management without instructor assistance. They can make their own decisions. So when we choose an effective assessment, this is how we do it. So we first determine the level of learning objective. So we determined what the objective should measure. So, maybe I want them to have knowledge of the National Airspace System. Then we list the indicators of desired behaviors. So, I want them to be able, in this airspace example, to look at a sectional chart and identify the different airspace. Then they establish criterion. I establish, objectives, the performance-based objectives. So I want them to have memorized the knowledge of different airspace weather requirements and rules and all the weather airspace rules. And then I can develop a performance-based test. So I can create a test with the different airspace rules, and this will give me feedback as to how much knowledge that they truly have. And the test doesn't have to be a written test. It can be oral quizzing. So that could be oral assessment. So what is oral assessment? Oral assessment is assessment through asking questions, and there's two main types. There's fact questions and higher order thinking skills questions. So fact question is memory or recall. So what is X? What is, I could point to the blue line around the SeaTac airport, and I could be like, what is this? And they're going to be like, okay, well, that's a Class Bravo airspace. Then there's higher order thinking skills questions. So that's where they analyze situations, solve problems. And so I could do, what would you do if X? What would you do if you're flying at night and your standby attitude indicator becomes inoperative? Something like that. So it requires them to apply their knowledge, and there's not one specific correct answer, but they need to be making a safe, what's the best way to say this? They need to analyze the situation and solve the problem based on proper aeronautical decision making. And the results, when done properly, reveal the training method effectiveness. If I'm getting through to this student, reviews material with the student, and that aids in that retention and keeps them interested and thinking and stimulated. So that keeps them active in the learning process. Emphasizes the important points identify points that need more emphasis, and promotes participation. And that additional participation makes them more active in the learning process, making them learn more. All right, so what are some effective questions to ask? Well, we want the questions to, of course, be on topic, apply to the subject, be brief and concise, adapt to the learner. So I'm not going to ask commercial level questions to a private student. Center on one idea without being vague or general. So asking the who, what, where, why, or how. And it should present a challenge. So questions to avoid are puzzle, oversized, top-up, bewilderment, trick, or irrelevant questions. So a puzzle question could be like a multiple choice answer if I give them a written exam. It's A, B, C, or D. And the answers are 1, 2, 3, 4. But I list it as A4, B3, C2, D1. So it's adding just an additional layer of complexity when you can make it simpler for them. Make it A1, B2, C3, D4. So it's just adding a puzzle. Don't give them puzzle questions. Oversize could be, how do airplanes fly? That's a lot. There's a lot of different ways you can go with answering that. So stick specifically to maybe something like, how does our wing produce lift? That's still a large topic, but it's not as oversized. Then there's toss-up question. In an emergency, do you squawk 7700 or do you talk on guard? Well, you can kind of do both. Then both are correct. So that's a toss-up. Bewilderment. So an example of a bewilderment question would be like, when you're low on final, how do we calculate density altitude? It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. That question makes literally no sense. There's also trick questions, like where do we find Class Foxtrot airspace? Obviously, that doesn't exist. It's a trick question. And then irrelevant question. You'd say something like, what size screw was on the cowling? In millimeters. Like, what? We don't need to know that. I'm just the pilot. I wonder if maintenance guys even know that. So those are the types of questions to avoid. When you respond to questions that students have, you want to understand their question. Don't cut them off. Display interest in their question. Be direct and accurate. And then determine whether they're satisfied with your answer or not. So if it's too advanced, you can explain it and return to that topic in the future. If they have a question that you don't want them to get too caught up in yet, you just say, you say you'll explain that in a future topic, that they don't need to know that yet. And if you don't know, just admit to that and then show them how they could find that answer. Because students will be able to tell if you fib an answer. All right, we talked a lot about assessment. Now let's talk about critique. So critique is basically an explanation for how to do something better. It gets a bad rap. It kind of has a negative connotation with it. I think if I get critiqued, it's like, oh, someone's going to tell me how I'm doing it all wrong. And that's not what it is. A critique, I think about it interchangeably as like advice. A critique is you're getting advice for how to do it better. So instructor to learner assessment used in conjunction with traditional and authentic assessment. An effective critique covers the good and bad in a performance, covers all the individual parts, and really goes over the whole performance. It can be oral, written, or both. So there's different types of critiques. There's the instructor-learner critique, where the instructor leads a group discussion in which class members offer criticism. There's the learner-led discussion, or critique rather, where the learner asks the student then, instead of the instructor, to lead the critique. If you're teaching a classroom and you have to leave the room, this could be helpful, but generally having the instructor lead that group discussion leads to a more comprehensive critique. Speaking of comprehensive critiques, there's also small group critique. So you divide, the class into small groups. Each group is assigned a specific area to focus on, and when they analyze that specific area, it'll usually result in a comprehensive assessment. The next is critique by another learner. So another learner just presents the entire critique. The self-critique simply asks the student, how do you think you did? And then that gives you that difference in perception for what they think and what you think. And then written critique. Critique is written down so the student can keep it for later use. This often is super helpful since you can get your critique right after you demonstrate your knowledge or apply your skill in some sort of way. But having that written down so that you can see that critique fresh, however long later, can be extremely beneficial. So the ground rules for critiques are staying within time limits, not covering too much, avoid absolute statements, never allow yourself to be maneuvered into defending criticism, ensure written and oral critiques are consistent, and allow time for a summary of the critique. So assessment of piloting ability, a little overview. We're going to determine how, what, and how well the learning is occurring, provide something constructive for them to work or build upon, and learners should understand the purpose of that assessment. So in general, this assessment and this evaluation is geared towards judging that student's ability, and it's really geared towards you as the instructor, asking, am I getting through to this student? Are my teaching techniques working? Anyway, assessment of piloting ability, demonstrated ability. Assessment must be based on standards adjusted to the learner's experience. I'm not going to be holding a brand new student on their third flight ever to ACS standards. Evaluation considers mastery of maneuver procedure elements rather than merely the overall performance. So again, evaluation considers the mastery of maneuver procedure elements rather than merely the overall performance. So example would be solo and solo cross-country privileges. So for a post-flight evaluation, you should keep the learner informed of their progress, tell them what they did good, what they did bad. What I've heard before is some people like to do a crap sandwich method where, they'll hit them with, something not negative, but something that is a real critique to the student. But then you slip in something they did, or I flipped it up. You start with something that they did well, then you say something that they needed to work on or improve on, and then you end with something they did well. So that's why it's called that crap sandwich. So a post-flight evaluation should be written. So I've flown with many instructors who they fly with this little notepad, and they write down all the things that I did good, what I did bad, and then they just rip that piece of paper off and give it to me. With scenario-based training, collaborative assessment is used when a scenario is completed. So for when we're practicing landings and solo flight, go around, teach the student to go around if they're not safe or if it's not within standards. Aviation there's no pressure of, if you go around then you're not skilled and you're not competent. There's no attitude like that at all. There's nothing wrong with doing a go around if it's not safe. Full stops are beneficial for control and checklist usage, and time for detailed instruction to debrief whatever happened in that specific lap in the pattern. Ensure a positive, confident building solo experience. Important to debrief immediately after solo and answer any questions. Be involved in all aspects of the solo to ensure correct flight procedures. Correcting errors, safety permitted. Let a learner make mistakes, safety permitting. Let them slam a couple landings in to show them what it's like to do that. And if you grab those controls too soon, then they're not going to learn. A lot of times, students learn the most from errors that they make. So varying procedures and combine them with another operation procedure to help understanding. When you're dealing with normal challenges, you want students to be able to deal with normal challenges on their own and that they can handle that on their own, without any instructor supervision or assistance. And practical test recommendations are a serious instructor responsibility. So that's why assessment and critique is so important, because I need to assess what my student can do so that I can know accurately what their knowledge and what their skills are, so that I know when to send them off for a practical test recommendation. And require a thorough demonstration of knowledge and skill. So that's really the importance of assessment and critique. Anyway, that's it for the student evaluation, assessment, and testing. Let me make sure here that I covered everything I wanted to cover. Yep, that's about it for this one.